Hello, welcome to episode 23 of Knitter Matters. Thank you so much for joining me today, and if you're watching the replay, thank you for and welcome to that too. My name's Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant with my company Style Matters International, and throughout my life I've had two major passions, which are sewing and knitting, and in knitting in particular I find extremely therapeutic and de-stressing, and I hope you do too. I used to own a wonderful yarn store in Brighton, England, and one of the great joys of owning a yarn store is that you get to teach people how to knit. So it's my pleasure to be able to do that again now, albeit on a different platform. Do feel free to put questions and comments in the thread below. I can't actually see it while we're doing the Facebook Live, but I will respond as soon as possible afterwards. And feel free to actually put questions in or comments throughout the week. That's what the page is for. And every now and then we do a little something. Last week we had a fun little competition where I asked you to guess the weight of the yarn and the samples that Mabel Mannequin was wearing. That's hard to say. And congratulations to Pauline Smith of Devon in the UK, who came very close to the real number. The actual number, the weight was 820 grams, which is about £1.13 ounces. And Pauline came in with 880 grams. So congratulations, Pauline. She gets Knitter Matters bragging rights. So every now and then we'll do fun little competitions like that. Anyway, feel free to post anything knittery in the Knitter Matters page. I'm going to ask the camera now to turn to the worktop so we can get started. So before we go on to I-cords, I want to show you my latest toy. This is a treat to myself, and we all need a treat every now and then. This is by a wool winder. It's by Knitter's Pride, and I purchased it online from the Woolery. Excellent customer service. I had several questions and they were excellent customer service. But I can't show you exactly how it all works at the moment because I need a Swift to do that. But a wool winder in essence converts. You can use skeins of yarns, hanks of yarn like this, and you'll end up with a cake of yarn, which is really nice to knit from because you can pull it out from the center. And I will set it up another time and I'll show you exactly how it works. But essentially, the yarn goes through here, you put it through there, and then you wind this by hand, and you get a lovely fat cake of yarn. And this is just so therapeutic. I can sit and play with this all day. But isn't she lovely with all the colours? I think she's beautiful. So that's my new toy, my new treat to me. And we all need a treat every now and then. Okay. So I know that many of you, like me, love books, your knitting books. And a while back in May, I did a Facebook post about this. I don't know what's going on with the camera here. I'm getting all sorts of signals. Okay, want it down? Right. So this was a Facebook post about this particular book by Patricia Roberts, who is a big, famous, very popular knitwear designer in the UK back in the 80s. She did lots of colour work, intarsia, interest in stitch work. This one, I found that I had actually kept the price, the original price list in the book. Gosh, yes. Imagine being able to buy 100% cashmere for just short of an ounce of it for $3.75, which in American dollars would be something like $5 something. Imagine that. Anyway, this was in 1982, so it's not surprising. Anyway, the reason I'm showing you these today is because you don't have to, just because a book is 30 years old or more, it doesn't mean to say that you can't use the designs. Look, for example, at these gorgeous cable designs. You could easily apply those to another pattern. This is another Patricia Roberts book. I'll open it and then put it flat as it's causing problems with the camera. Look at these lovely summery tops here. They actually look crocheted, but they're not, they're knitted. So you could actually take that stitch pattern and apply it to another pattern. You could apply that to another pattern if you wanted to. if you're confident in adapting it, if you wanted to change the shape or the fit to get a more current shape, then you could do that too. But if that's not something you're familiar with doing, or just don't want to do that, just try a different stitch pattern. Do a sample swatch. You could then apply it to a garment with the same amount of stitches, but you need to do a gauge swatch anyway to make sure it would fit. But even if you didn't want to do that, you could end up with your sample swatches as squares and make them into a really interesting pillow or afghan or something like that. Anyway, so it's not just about nostalgia when you come to look at the books, it's about what you can do with them. Okay, today we're talking about the I-cord. So what exactly is an I-cord? Is it Apple's latest bit of technology? Is it another wonderful iteration of an iPad or an iPhone? No, it's not. And we'll come on to exactly what it is in a minute. Essentially, it's a tubular cord. But it's how it's made that's really clever. But let me first show you this before I show you how to make an I-cord. This is a tubular piece of knitting, and many of you will be familiar with what we used to do called French knitting. It's done on a spool or a sort of a knitting dolly. I remember having once one like a little doll as a child. I've seen cute ones that have got mushroom caps with the hooks in, but this is my grown-up version. It's hand-turned wood, and I like it because I love the feel of the wood. But whether it's a knitting dolly or something like this, the result is the same. Some have 4 hooks, this one has 5. You are sort of not limited, but if you have a bigger one like this with 5 hooks, then you're going to get a bigger knitted tube. If you've got one with 4 hooks, you're going to have a slightly smaller tube. But let me show you how this works. Okay, so they all get the same result. So you would put your thread round here, hang on to that. You would loop this round. You want to do it counterclockwise round the 4 hooks. Okay, and then you're back to where you start. You're going to hold that quite snugly, and I'm holding the end that's coming out the bottom with my little finger on my left hand. And then you get the pin, the hook, whatever it is, and this goes around the back then of that first hook. The first one is always a bit tricky, and I'm going to loop that over, and I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to loop that over my hook. First couple of rows are always a bit tricky. As a kid, we used to make yards of this stuff. Kept us amused for hours. And we'd kind of curl them up and stitch them into wonky mats and things like that. And you might think, well, what on earth would I want to make these things for? This is, first few rows. Right, okay, I can let go of my yarn at the bottom now, hanging it out from under my spool. It does get quicker as you go along. It's just the first row, you can't really see what's going on. But this is what you do, you see, and then you keep tugging that down. It's almost the basis of a very simple knitting machine. And remember, I said that in a minute because I'm going to explain a bit more about that. Okay. I'm a bit clumsy here, but essentially you keep doing that, okay, and you keep pulling that down, and what comes out is this. That's exactly how I made this one the other evening. So that's your knitting spool or your French knitting, and I just sewed in the ends. So how would you use it? Well, you could use it if you don't want to make wonky mats like I did as a child. You could use it for decorating things. And here is a really interesting pattern that I have. Let me put that flat for you. Which is basically a shawl, but the shawl is knitted as a long rectangle, and then yards and yards of French knitted tubes, which are then attached and worked into the holes that are knitted in the shawl in strategic places. Super effective. How clever is that? Really nice. And I mean, I think that the actual French knitting part takes about 4 balls of yarn. So, but that's the whole point of that design. Otherwise, this shawl would just be a rectangular piece of knitting with holes in. But just adding that and sort of plaiting them or knitting them, they've worked that into a pattern as they've done that afterwards. Really effective. So yes, you can do more than just the wonky mats and bowls that I used to make with mine. Okay. Anyway, so that's a tubular cord. And as I said, it's a simplified form. Using that spool is a simplified form of hand knitting machines work. But these are I-cords. Again, tubular pieces of knitting. The difference here is this one was done with 5 stitches. This one was done with 3. And the I-cord, that's the beauty of the I-cord. You can, I won't say you can do as many stitches as you like, because after a certain point it becomes just tubular knitting. You're knitting in the round. But you could do even 2 stitches. You could do 3. You could do 4 and 5. And you can do some very clever things with it. The main difference between that and this is that your I-cord is done with double pointed needles, and it's done with 2 double pointed needles. I'm going to show you exactly how it's done in a minute. But why is it called an I-cord? Well, there's a quick bit of knitting history here. Elizabeth Zimmerman, a British-born knitting teacher and designer who ultimately emigrated to the US, she revolutionised modern knitting with her books and instructional programmes that were broadcast on American public TV. She died in 1999, aged 89. And Elizabeth is credited with discovering the technique by accident. And it's said, if you look this up, there's a lot of books and a lot of online stuff that says she thought the principle was so simple that she called it the idiot cord. But her daughter, Meg Swanson, who is also a knitting educator, says her mother already knew the idiot cord to be what the tubular cords from French knitting or spool knitting were called. And when Elizabeth found a hand-cranked tabletop version of an idiot cord machine in the 50s, she studied the movement of the hooks and worked out how to replicate the cord on 2 needles. But she thought the name idiot cord was rather rude, so she changed it to I-cord. Now, personally, I think it's far from being an idiot cord. I think it's ingenious and inventive, and I think that the I in I-cord should stand for that, ingenious or inventive. But whatever way Elizabeth Zimmerman brought the I-cord to prominence, she should certainly be credited with creating a variety of ways to use it, including a cast-on, which I'll show you in a minute. For now, I'm going to show you the basic I-cord, how to do the I-cord. And for that, I need 2 of my needles. I have a bit of yarn here. Okay, I'm going to take that off. So I'm going to do a 3-stitch I-cord here. I'm just going to cast on. I'm going to cast on 3. Doesn't really matter how you cast it on. I'm just going to do a simple cast on here. I'm going to cast on 1, 3, okay. Yeah, I'm actually casting on 2 because my slip knot acts as the first one. Let's get those out of the way. So what I do is I'm going to knit, knit, knit. Now ordinarily here I would turn this round. That's what I'm not going to do. What I do now is I slide this back to the start of my double pointed needle. I still keep the yarn at the back and I start knitting with my yarn that's from the last stitch, okay? If I turned it, it would become the first stitch, but no, I keep it there. It's a bit strange at first, but it's, again, like so many things with knitting, it's strangely addictive. Now I give this a bit of a pull as I start to knit. You don't want it so tight that you can't knit with it, but you pull it. So I'm going to knit to the end. Knit to the end. Slide. I'm going to pull that again as I start to knit. My yarn is still at the back. I'm going to use it from the last stitch. I knit. I knit. I knit. Takes a few rows to start seeing it, but what starts to happen is the cord folds in on itself. Do a couple more rows and then I show you a 5-stitch I cord that I've already done, because you can see it a bit clearer like that. So I'm pulling my yarn, I knit, and you're only doing knit, you're not doing purl. Remember, it's almost like you're knitting in the round. Slide. If you just remember, knit, slide, pull, knit. Slide, pull. And you can see how that's closing up. If I show you one that I did earlier, and it's fallen somewhere. Where is it? Ah, it's right here. I put it somewhere where I could see it, and now I can't. Okay, this is a 5-stitch I-cord. You can see very clearly on the back how that has closed up. So again, if I was just to do another row here, doing exactly the same thing. It's just, so I'm pulling that, and I'm knitting, and I'm knitting, and I'm knitting, and I'm knitting, and I'm knitting. Okay, and then I slide. So as we go along, you can see how that pulling that closes that up. So you get this really nice tubular effect. So you could just keep knitting yards of that, and the more you knit I-cords, the more you'll look for things that you can actually start to decorate things with them. But you can also do really cool things like this, which is actually casting on with an I-cord, or cast off with an I-cord. And you could use that. There's an image here of a hat in this book. Sorry, the cover is a bit shiny. Which way am I pulling it? This way. You can see here around the band of this hat, there's an I-cord there. From the crown, it's joined, and then this ribbing, and then another I-cord. And essentially, that's what I've copied there. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Out the way. So let's have a look at this first one. How do we do this? So this is the I-cord, and this is what the knitting that's come up from this. Now to do this, you need to cast on as many stitches as you want in your knitting. So if you need 40 stitches, sorry, I'll start that. You need to knit your I-cord. I'm sorry, I'll start that again. You need to knit your I-cord first. So if you need 40 stitches for your work, you need to make your I-cord 40 rows long, for example. Let me show you. This is one I started already. Now, I've cut this yarn only because when I show you, I want to do it in a different colour, okay, so that you can really see what I'm doing. So I'm going to use this purple here. I'll just undo that bit of knitting there. I'm going to use this purple. Sorry, I'm going to cut that. There's a knot in that now. Okay, so I've done however many rows I want here. Ignore the fact that this is another piece of yarn other than the colour. I'm going to knot it only because I want to fasten it. But you would be working, well, of course you could change colour, but you would be working with the same colour. So what I'm going to do, this is my working yarn. All I've done is an I-cord here. I did a 3-stitch I-cord, and I've done something like 20 odd rows. I've actually then cast off, and you do that in the usual method, 1 stitch over the other, and I leave one on the needle. Now I'm going to just decide on a loop, and I'm going to pick up that loop and knit. And I'm going to follow that line. I'm not going to wiggle about. I'm going to use those loops from the tubular knitting to pick up and so on and so on. So on the reverse, it's going to look like that. I'll do a few more and then I'll just show you the piece again that I've already done. so you can see it more clearly. And then you would just continue, once you've worked along the whole length of your I-cord, you would do whatever knitting you want after that, stocking stitch or seed stitch or whatever your pattern is. But it's a really nice way to start off a piece of knitting. Okay, so that's all you would do. If I show you again with this one that's already done, I've just used stocking stitch, but it's exactly the same thing that I've just shown you. Okay, and on that back side, it's really neat. So you could choose to use that. It also gives a bit of stretch. There is a certain amount of stretch there as well. So it's a pretty nice way of starting something off. So let's have a look at this other one, slightly more complicated. I'm going to have a sip of water here. And for this, so let's say this was on that hat or something else. Maybe it's a cuff, something like that you want to do this technique on. What I've done here, and you can see it on the back, how neat that is. Again, you've got some stretch, which I need because I've done this on rib. So this is actually casting off with it. And I'll show you that technique now. So I've done another piece of knitting here. I've done the rib again. I've done the same amount of rows. What I need to do here is cast on. Let's have that purple yarn again. Let me cut that off. Let's have some purple yarn. I want to show you in a different colour. So I would cast on. I'm going to do 4 stitches on this one. So I'm going to cast on 4 stitches. 1, 2. I'm actually casting on 3 because my slip knot is 1. Okay. And I'm going to knit my first row. Now, I'm going to just stop there because what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start knitting my cast off stitches at the same time. And I'm going to take 1 stitch from here and this last stitch, and I'm going to knit into the back of the loop. So to make life a bit easier, I'm just going to transfer to my right hand needle, grab hold of that, and then I'm going to knit into the back of the loop. This is a bit fiddly at first, but once you get going, it becomes much easier. Now, I still do the thing where I slide it and I pull it. So my next row. There is a way that you could also just increase your stitches when you're ready. Oh, I'm knitting now with the wrong thing here. Oh, I'm knitting with the end. Try not to knit with the end where you've cast on, people. That's a rookie mistake, but one that I have just made. Okay, right. Get this right now. I'm using my yarn that's the last stitch. I've slid my stitches up to the front, up to the top of the needle rather, and I'm knitting to that last stitch. Then I'm going to knit that last stitch together with the next one off the needle, and I'm going to knit into the back of both stitches. Okay, now if it was easier and you're still using the same color, you could just cast on, increase to 4 stitches and use that to be your I-cord. Because I wanted to show you in a different color, it was just easier to cast on separately. Again, I'm sliding, I'm using my yarn, I'm pulling. I'm knitting, I'm knitting, I'm knitting, and again, I'm going to knit these 2 in the back of the loops. Okay, you can see that's already starting. Do a couple more. Give my yarn a pull. what you're doing, you're creating a tube. You're just closing that gap when you make that pull. And I think Elizabeth Zimmerman's discovery, accidental or otherwise, is fantastic. I love an I-cord. And so on and so on. You can already see that's curling over very nicely how we want it. I'll do one more. Sorry, there's lots of yarn and needles on the table today. I know it's confusing. It's confusing for me. And I set it all up. Okay. Get that on my needle, back of the loops, and there you go. You see how that's making your I-cord as a cast off. You can see that's all nicely curling over there. One more. It's like, oh, what can I put an I-cord on? What can I finish or start an I-cord with? Again, they're strangely therapeutic, as so many knitting things are. And at first it seems like, I don't know where my fingers are going. And you will make mistakes. You'll pick up the wrong end or you'll turn, and but you'll soon know what you're doing wrong. You can't fail to. There, see? So, there we go. I'll show you the back now. You can actually see how that's curling round as this one did. That's what you'll end up with. So, your I-cord is a really useful design feature. It's functional, it works, you'll get a nice sort of stretchy edge. It's perfect for hats, it's great for cuffs, and you could do that. Let's say this was the other way around. This could be your, where you started on, you could put an I-cord there before you actually start with a sleeve or the body of a garment. It would make a really nice design feature. You could do it in a different colour if you wanted to, or keep it the same. But it's a very nice thing to learn, and it's super simple. So your I-cords, and you'll get the same effect as your tubular knitting, as I said. It just means you can vary the size of them a bit. This was this was a 3-stitch. This was a 5-stitch. This came out the French spool, and there's another little I-cord that I've got here on a hat that I haven't yet finished, but this is a very small little I-cord, and I'm going to turn it into a knot, and then it'll go on the top of my hat. I'll make that actually more like a sort of knot like that. So you could just do a tiny little one to finish off a garment like that. This has still got to be sewn up, but that's where that one will go in due course. So have fun with your I-cords. I'm going to ask the camera to come back up to me. So I hope you enjoyed watching the I-cord, and I hope you enjoy doing them. Don't forget that you get a 20% discount with any Mary Maxim purchase off their website. 20% discount off of one item, which would be the highest price item, providing you put the code Cheryl in at checkout. So don't forget the promo code, it's Cheryl. That's easy enough to remember. And that's for any order you place, whether it's today, tomorrow, next week, whenever, and really from anywhere you might be watching, because they ship globally. This and all other episodes are uploaded to our Facebook page afterwards, and our Knitter Matters page, of course. They're also on our Style Matters International website. We're on Instagram. We also now have a page on Ravelry, which is very exciting. So like, share, follow, and subscribe to us on YouTube, please. I'm here to help. So post any questions you have, whether it's about the I-cord or any other knitting, or anything that you'd like to see me do in future. I'm always trying to think of what would be the next thing, especially for a beginner knitter. We've covered a lot of different subjects. So if there's something that you'd like me to go over again, then let me know. In the meantime, enjoy your knitting. Stay well, stay safe, keep calm, and keep knitting, and I will see you next week. Thank you for joining me today. Bye-bye.